and welcome to It's Not You, but Sometimes It Is. And this was an awesome, very real, vulnerable, authentic conversation with Serena Schultz out of Colorado as she talks about her very fast track from an emerging brand new leader to COO and all the mistakes she made and what she had to learn very quickly about going from managing teams to leading high performing teams in a company that was undergoing really fast paced growth. So I know you're really going to be able to relate to her struggles and enjoy the episode. Welcome to this episode of It's Not You, but Sometimes It Is, the podcast where real leaders talk about the real crap we face. And I am so excited to welcome Serena Schultz. She is the Chief Operating Officer at Mogli, based in Colorado. And Serena, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Meg.
So can you give us a little introduction of both Mogli and also your path there to the C-suite in the company?
Yeah, sure. So Mogli is a Salesforce ISV. So we're an application that sits on top of Salesforce, and we allow businesses to connect to their clients and their constituents right where they are, which is on their phone. So we provide text messaging and WhatsApp-based communication methods that flow right out of Salesforce and allow people to just work a little bit smarter without having to cross multiple devices to have that communication. So, yeah, I did not think I was going to be in the tech world when I started out in my career. I've always been a bit of an organizer, even when I was in high school, organizing Halloween carnivals and different things in my community. I went to school for social work, and I thought I was going to change the world that way. I had two very intense internships in college, and that quickly told me that social work was not going to be my long-term career, and you needed to find a different pathway. And I didn't know where I was going after that. And so I said yes to just every opportunity that kind of came up. I worked in a lot of different industries, and then eventually kind of got into tech. And when I got to Mogli about 9 years ago now, I had been bopping around quite a bit in my 20s, and I decided that I was going to stay there for a little while. Like sight unseen, kind of when I started, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to stay here for a minute. Because what I'd realized about myself is that every time a new opportunity came up or something needed to be rebuilt, I was ready to kind of shift away and go do something else. And I realized that I'd never really stayed through that change, and rebuilding things. And so I made that choice early on. And that was a good thing because we've rebuilt things a lot in the last 9 years. I never set out to be the COO. I didn't even want to be a manager. I actually was surprised by my boss. He was early on. He said, Serena, you're going to be managing 5 project managers. And I was like, well, ew, like that sounds awful, managing all these other people. But I just kind of kept saying yes to things in general. And I found myself moving from implementing Salesforce for folks to leading our professional services team to later going on to lead our operations portion of our business. And it's been a series of mistakes and missteps, I will say, very vulnerably, but beautifully so. And I'm really grateful for all the support that I've gotten from not only my leaders around me, but my direct reports around me, because I think they have really shaped me into the leader that I am now. And that's kind of an awesome thing.
Yeah, yeah. I hear a lot of humility there, and I think a lot of times I meet people who have somehow it's almost like we feel like we stumbled into C-suite roles. It's not like we said, I'm gonna end up here, right? But we said yes, and we got curious, and we were good problem solvers, and we kind of ended up there because people saw something in us, and we had the humility to listen to the smart ideas of people around us and get support, right? And very much seems like that was your path, and also landed in a company that was growing and doing exciting things in a good market. So you talked about how you really had to stick in there through things were really challenging and difficult, and that's a blessing. It's also hard. So I'm curious, what's been one of the hardest challenges you've had to overcome, not just necessarily at this company, but just a hard challenge you've overcome as you've been building high-performing teams in a fast-paced, fast-changing environment?
Yeah, yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think one of the hardest moments that I had was actually really early in my leadership career. And it was actually after I came back from having my second son. I had a COVID baby. So like right as COVID was starting, I was pregnant and I had just started, leading my professional services team. And at that point, I was still very much a player coach. I did not know fully how to manage that team well. And I was still an individual contributor at the same time and had big projects. And I went out for a couple of months on leave, and people kept things going as best they could while I was gone. But when I came back, I realized everything was really way behind on a number of really key initiatives. And I was sleep deprived and trying to get through all of the life things of having a kiddo. And it was a really, really stressful time. At that point, I was owning the business unit of our services. So I was selling, I was coordinating our teams, and I was like contributing on these large projects. And I wanted to do it all perfect. And I didn't want to ask for help. And I just got really stuck and kind of isolated a little bit during that period of time. Um, Eventually, things cleared. It was a lot of others being frustrated, me being frustrated, but just needing to kind of keep putting one foot in front of the other. And at the end of that challenging period, what I realized was that I wasn't the right person to lead that particular team. And we needed to make some really specific strategic changes around that team too, because we were kind of running two different business units. We were running our app that I talked about earlier on, and then we were running this professional services division, and they sometimes overlapped, but they didn't always overlap. And so all of the operational and all of the marketing and all of those things just weren't there for my business unit to be successful on its own. So we as a leadership team had to make a really hard decision about, did we want to continue to move this offering forward, or did we want to roll everything into the app and refocus all our great human talent inwards? We did eventually decide to make that change, and we stopped offering services that weren't outside of our application. But I was really burnt out on consulting during that period. And I was really struggling to be the leader that I needed to be for that team to transition them through. And so the hard part was that I had to tell our CEO that thing, that I was like, I don't think that I'm actually the right person to do this. And I think I'm maybe the right person to do this other thing, which is to go internal and lead our operations. And he agreed. And so we brought in another leader to help that team transition through. She did an amazing job and we worked really well together. But that was a really hard moment because I don't like giving things up. I don't like saying that maybe I'm not the right person to do this thing and to have the outcome that we're wanting. It was a really humbling experience.
Yeah.
And I was really grateful that folks didn't give up on me and they still saw the potential that I could have in other areas of the business. But it was one of those moments where I had to just raise my hand and say, I need some significant help here, and it's not going to be me that leads us across the finish line, and that has to be okay.
Yeah. And I'm sure it took a significant amount of trust in your supervisor, or it was the owner of the company that you had to say that to. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That took a very strong relationship between the two of you for you to be able to come and say that. Yeah. Which is a testament to his leadership.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I know that you, in your role, both that past role and your current role, you have had to have a sharp eye on culture. And you've got a lot of brilliant people there doing hard things together. And the saying culture eats strategy for breakfast. You guys have um, really big goals. I know you're very ambitious. So can you give us an example, either in this company or the past, where culture was eating strategy for breakfast? Or the importance of culture really hit you? What did that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in our industry, there have been a lot of changes in regulations in the last 5 years or so. I'm sure you've gotten a million spammy text messages on your phone. I have too. I hate them. Um, well, strategy is great, right? Strategy is great. But sometimes things happen outside your control, and all of a sudden you need to pivot and deal with that thing that's coming in. And so those changes in regulation were one of those things for us. So a couple of years ago, the FCC put out some regulation around text messaging, and all of the phone carriers responded in kind, and they decided we're going to regulate our own industry, just like they do in restaurants and food, so that the government won't overregulate it for us. And that was great, but there's a lot of different partners. And all of a sudden, there were a lot of registrations that we had to do for our hundreds of clients, and they needed to be done within a specific period of time. And our clients were having to update their privacy policies and their websites and all these different things in order to continue to use our tool. Well, that was not part of our strategy. That was not something that we planned to take a large portion of our workforce and point it towards this thing. It was very much a reactive situation. No one liked it. Everyone was grumpy. It was really long hours. The guidelines were constantly changing. So we'd be halfway through a conversation with someone, and then something would happen. And we're like, oh, actually, you need to do these other things instead. It was a tough time for every post-sales person on our team.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest thing that I kind of learned during that moment was about how your values as a company, spoken and unspoken, are what see you through those moments where it's not part of the plan, but you have to deal with it anyway. And how are we going to deal with this prolonged period of uncomfortableness without hating each other and everybody quitting at the end of it? And I think that a lot of it was about, we have five beautiful values and they all showed up really well. But I think the other thing that showed up was some of the unwritten values of our company, which were around teamwork, which were around like there's no levels. I'm in there doing emails just like you are to get all of this done at this moment, and that's okay. Oh, you learned something new and you figured out a great way to do it. Great, share it with everybody. It doesn't have to come from the top. It can happen from anywhere. And so that kind of teamwork on the ground in a moment where we didn't have control of the strategy, we were just getting pulled along. It went a long way. And it's still something that we deal with. This is still a challenge for the organization, but um,
Mhm.
people felt proud. People felt proud of how we addressed the challenges that came up with that shift. Our clients were pleased. I had friends who actually have get their services from other competitors of ours calling me being like, hey, how do we do this thing? How come our text messages aren't going out? I'm like, here's what you have to do, because we became really powerful thought partners for just the community within that period of time. And I think that went a long way for kind of how we value our own service, but also how we value each other.
Awesome. That's a great example. So, Serena, you had mentioned earlier how when you realized I'm gonna have to be a boss. I'm gonna have to be a manager of people, and you had an immediate negative, like, don't want to do that. I imagine it's because you probably had some bad bosses in your experience, right? And we all have, like, all the polls and research show that most people don't quit the job, they quit a boss. And a lot of us learn how we don't want to lead from some of the leaders we've had. So can you give me, like, what do you consider the behaviors of a bad boss? What are some examples of that where you learned how you wanted to lead by watching what you didn't like?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I've been thinking about this a lot because I don't think that I think I didn't recognize what those behaviors were necessarily as the direct report. I would recognize them more when I tried them out with my teams and they didn't work how I thought they were going to work. And I'm like, oh shoot, that was a fail. That did not have the effect that I wanted. Did I feel that way before and I just didn't notice? I don't know. But I think that across all of it, the biggest thing that I've seen in people who have managed me, in people who have led alongside, et cetera, is alignment. If this is a struggle that everybody has and that I have often, and no one's perfect in it, and it changes with every group. Every group needs you align them differently. But I think being able to get everybody on the same page and keep them on the same page while fostering a feedback loop is a really, really hard thing.
Yeah.
And that isn't ever just done. I read this quote the other day and it was talking about how I used to think that communication was the most important thing until I realized that comprehension was, and that if I was talking and talking and talking, but no one was understanding what I was saying, then we're all just in silent chaos. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so true. It's absolutely what it is. And so I think what I have been learning in terms of how to get around that is one, I say everything 7 times. Like, we're just humans. I can't say something once and expect that you remembered it and are going to change everything based on me saying it one time. No, you need it written, you need it emailed, you need it slacked. We have to talk about it. Then I have to ask for feedback about it. And it's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's because you're human and we all just need to hear things a bunch of times to understand and really ingrain them. And I think letting people be human and recognize them that I am also human in that fact has been really great. And so I think, when I've seen bad bosses, if you will, struggle, it's often because they're not aligned with their teams and they're not all moving in that same direction, whether that's culturally or strategy. I think it can be both.
Yeah, and there's a lot of frustration when there's disconnect. Why aren't you getting that? Why aren't you doing what I asked you? Why aren't you doing it the way I asked you to? Right? And the frustration. And I think there's just a lack of understanding that humans, we forget 90% of what you've told us within a couple days. Right? We don't learn that fast, right? And also when we're stressed out, we don't learn very quickly. So if you throw too much at us too quickly, or we feel a little overwhelmed, we're not going to learn. We're going to forget. I don't think we understand each other's brains and emotions and how humans really work. And then we get very frustrated. Yeah. So, and that frustration just makes things worse. Yeah. So, what have been personally for you some of the biggest challenges that you faced as a manager, as a leader of people, when you're trying to create an atmosphere of high performance and really bring out the best in people? What's been hard for you personally?
Yeah. I definitely lost a few people right as I became a manager, and I thought a lot about the people don't leave jobs, they leave managers, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's happening. What's going on? And I had to work really hard at my empathy and my trust building because as an individual contributor, I loved to be the hero. Like, I loved that sound of my cape flapping in the wind, it was nothing better. But I realized, and I was told, I had some really wonderful direct reports who were very honest with me, and I appreciate them tremendously for that. That they're like, I want you to partner with me. I don't want you to fix it. I want you to partner with me. And that was a really big piece of learning for me. I inherited a team early on after coming over into operations. And as I inherited them, the assistant director on that team came and unloaded a whole lot of feedback that she'd been storing up that I was not quite ready to receive at that moment. And I felt just drowned in this feedback. And I immediately went to my go-tos of, okay, I'm going to fix the problem. You've given me 7 problems. Let's just knock them off and create action items and let's get them fixed. And that was not what she wanted. She wanted to fix her own problems and she wanted a partner to fix them with. And that was a huge piece of learning for me. I also um, have learned the hard way about expectation management and documenting things and checking in on those things. You can't hold people accountable to expectations that they are not fully aware of and haven't bought in on, and you're not checking in on. It isn't a fair situation and
Right.
it doesn't create trust.
Yeah.
And so, over the last few years, we've put in a really robust system for how are we tracking our KPIs? How
Mhm.
do you get your bonus? What are those things? And we've continued to evolve it because I feel like so much of the pain and suffering is around that alignment, but also just about expectations. And you are constantly teaching other people how to treat you and how you want to be treated. But then you got to do something with that.
Yeah.
So I, yeah, I think those were a couple of the main things that I learned. But the other one I was thinking about too was that my first job out of college, I worked at a life coaching and consulting firm, and I was the executive assistant for their CEO and president, husband and wife team. And they used to do all of these weekends, they would call them. So they were like immersive
Yeah.
experiences. And you would be going through their programming, and part of the programming was actually run these weekends, and everyone had a different role to play. And you had to take turns like doing all the different roles. And one of the hardest roles was called the producer, because the producer had to know what everybody was doing, keep everybody accountable, keep everybody on track, and they weren't allowed to help. All they could do was walk around with their little clipboard or whatever they had and check in and make sure that things were going, but they couldn't actually go take out the trash. They had to ask the person who was supposed to take out the trash to take the trash out. And it was a really challenging thing because those are people often like myself who were individual contributors and were able to do all the things and were really good at getting their hands dirty, not so good at feeling awkwardly out behind the scenes saying, oh, I'm just helping everybody else get their things done. I'm not actually the one contributing. And I think that if I had to kind of sum it all up, that was one of my biggest learnings as a leader, is that more often than not, I need to be in the producer role. I need to enable my teams to do those hard things, and that my output looks a lot different now than
Mhm.
it did then. My output is not mine, it's my teams, and
Mhm.
making sure that they're better set up, whether it's at this company, at their next company, where have you, to be successful because I didn't stand in their way, needing to take that credit.
Yeah. And that leads right into what I wanted to talk about too, because we get a payoff when we get that little kick, right? That little dopamine kick of
Yeah.
like, ooh, yay, I did something great and I get a reward, I get recognition. Like I got to jump in and save the day and I got to produce this and it's hard to step back and stop yourself from that, have the self-restraint to then lift someone else up, give them the opportunity and actually be doing that 90% of your time and train other people, support, empower them, watch them do it. And it's just the self-restraint of letting go of being able to do that when it used to give you so much satisfaction and fulfillment, right? That was really hard for me as a leader to get out of my own way and shift out of the mindset of like, this makes me feel good, right? It's like my own needs getting met
Mhm.
of accomplishment and achievement and getting better at things and contributing and being in service and stopping all that and watching other people grow and develop. And that was very fulfilling for me too. But still, I still had to like restrain myself back. Do you have any other examples of where you've realized that you were your own worst enemy? There was some sort of trait or approach or mindset that you were battling. And what did you carry forward from that lesson?
Yeah. Um, I think I think the two things that come up for me, one are what we kind of talked about before. Like when I get stressed, I still do go back to, okay, I'm going to grab the thing.
Mhm.
I'm stressed out. I'm worried you're not going to make it. I'm going to grab the thing. And so I have to really fight that off.
Mhm.
And I have to own that with my teams and say, hey, I am feeling this way right now. And here's what I need from you so that I don't inadvertently do what I don't want to do and take this over. And I think that type of vulnerability and communication is really powerful because they need to know that I'm desperately trying to not step in, honestly, and that I'm feeling stressed about that.
I like it.
Um, but I think the other thing that has come up really recently is around learning, right? And this is kind of the empathy piece. So I've been through tons of different experiences in my career and in my life, and I've learned lots of things. And many people have been alongside me and have learned those same things at the same time. But there's other people who have been there too, but they haven't learned those same things. Maybe they were kind of tangentially beside me. Maybe they were not involved as much as I thought that they were. But what I have found even recently in myself, and this is like towards my leaders, sometimes towards direct reports, just in general, is I sometimes find myself getting frustrated that other people have not learned the thing that I have learned because I was like, you were there. Why didn't you take this away from it? Geez, why are we doing this again? And I was even in a period of frustration earlier this year where I was feeling that way. And then I finally stopped myself and was like, oh my gosh, Serena, you are annoyed with this person for not gotten out of this past experience what you got out of it. That's so silly and unfair, and you can't hold them accountable for that. That's ridiculous. And so it's interesting how your brain works, right? You're like, well, you were there. How come you didn't get out of it what I got out of it? Oh no, that's actually not how it works. How can I support them to get out the beneficial things now that they're going through the thing that I
Mhm.
could have done? So I think that's it it was a shock to me that I
Mhm.
had that moment of feeling like, oh my goodness, I am expecting people to be me. And I think that's really where that's the counterintuitive thing that I sometimes go back to when I'm stressed. I'm like, okay, I'm going to hold everybody to my standard. And that's not fair, right?
Yeah.
I have to hold them to the standard that we've agreed upon. And that may not be what I hold myself to,
Yeah.
for better or worse. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, based on our personality, right, and right brain, left brain, how we process information, they might be focused on a totally different thing than you and pulling
Mhm.
something else out of it that you didn't. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and it's just fascinating that we all walk around thinking everyone's paradigm and lens is our own. Everyone should be focused on what we're focused on. Everyone's thinking what we're thinking. And that, yeah, it's, oh, humans.
I
Leadership
know.
would be so easy if it wasn't for people.
I know. I know. I love the Enneagram. It's one of my favorite personality models. And whenever I find out when somebody else is, I'm like, okay, let me go read about whatever that is so that I can understand, what is your motivation? What are you
Yeah,
coming to this with? What's going to freak you out? I find it so helpful
yeah.
because if we don't have something else to bump up against, then my default is
Mhm.
to be like, well, then you must be like me, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the more you learn and take all those different personality profiles, right, then you can appreciate what other people bring and start to recognize and
Mhm.
go, oh, they're one of those, right? I'm going to tune into
Mhm.
that. And also I find I'm that challenger type, right? And I can just hear myself starting to poke and argue and challenge. And I think, you know what, Meg? Maybe that's not time. Maybe it's not time for that right now.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's
for
listen
sure.
to the Serenas of the world. This is when they shine, and yeah, and then things can get a little bit more fun. But things are hard enough in leadership, especially when we're tackling these big problems in high stress environments, and we tend to make it harder than it needs to be, and we take some of the fun out of it with a
Mhm.
lot of this unnecessary stress.
Yeah.
So, and that we sound so wise right now. So let me ask my next question because I just really teed it up well. So let's say I can give you a time machine. All right. And you're
Mhm.
going to go back in time 10 to 15 years. What advice would you give yourself back then?
Yeah, I think the main piece of advice would be that I don't have to be the expert and that being curious and holding space can be just as powerful as knowing the answers. Um, I think that's the biggest one. But I also think that slowing down feels really counterintuitive, but often has been much more successful in my experience than going quickly. Um, and so I think those are kind of the two main things that I tell
Nice.
myself.
Nice. Yeah. It's really hard to tell someone to slow down. Like if you slow down, you'll actually end up going faster in the long run. It's really hard to tell someone that when they're feeling that urgency. It's hard to tell me that some days still. Um,
Yeah.
and that need to be right, man. There's so much ego in that. I'm right, I have the answers, and being able to pull out of ego, that takes so many years.
Well, I'm the boss, right? So I
Yeah.
need to have the answers and be right.
Yeah, that's what we were taught. We were taught that by all these other leaders who were like, I'm swooping in here with all the answers. I'm the savior and the hero, right? And I'm going to put out all the fires. And we that was demonstrated for us. And it's hard also to let go of that paradigm.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, Serena, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your insights with us.
Yeah, my pleasure.